This is Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and thank you so much for being with me today. So we have Lee Slonimsky and Peter Bricklebank on for our fifth Tuesday, and I'm going to start by reintroducing everybody to Lee Slonimsky, and I'm going to read his bio. Lee Slonimsky is a poet, novelist, financial manager, and former college writing teacher. His latest books of poems are the bilingual Greek and English translation of sonnet sequence Pythagoras in Love from Enipneo Press, translated by Greek National Poetry Prize winner Stamatis Polinakis, and published this last May. And Tibbetts Brook Park, 1953, published a year ago by Spuyten Duyvil Press. His novel Bermuda Gold uses the hedge fund industry as background for a thriller. He has also collaborated with his wife, Hamid and Mary Higgins Clark award-winning author Carol Goodman on the Black Swan Rising trilogy under the pseudonym Lee Carroll. Lee's hedge fund, Ocean Partners LP, takes a special interest in the humane treatment of animals. Last but not least, he has taught writing at a number of colleges, including the City College of New York and the University of Pennsylvania. So let's get started. Lee, you want to introduce Peter?
Yes. Okay. Hi, Peter.
Hi there, Lee. How are you doing?
I'm okay. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Peter, who is a brilliantly talented writer who I have known for many years. I think we originally met at City College in the early 1980s, and just an extraordinary essay that Peter's going to read. Let me read his bio, and then I will turn it over to him, and we'll get started listening to An Eclipse of One's Own.
Great.
Peter Bricklebank has published in the American Voice, Carolina Quarterly, Mid-American Review, Kansas Quarterly, Confrontation, Fiction, the New York Times Book Review, and the Chicago Tribune et al. His chapter on essay/memoir appears in the Portable MFA. He's taught at New York University, Sarah Lawrence College, and elsewhere, including a year as nonfiction writer in residence at Central Connecticut State University and at Bar-Ilan University, Tel Aviv. Pandemics permitting, he co-teaches a writer workshop in Oaxaca, Mexico. He currently teaches in the online graduate program of National University and at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. His work is forthcoming in the Bellevue Literary Review. Okay, so without further ado, Peter, I'll turn the microphone over to you, and while your listeners get ready for a real treat of outstanding literary memoir/nonfiction.
All right, thank you very much, Lee. You're
welcome.
This is An Eclipse of One's Own. There are more than 155,000 species, butterflies, moths, and skippers, whatever they might be, that constitute the order Lepidoptera. But it's moths that are seemingly everywhere. Our kitchen cabinets, our bedroom closets, in our jars of flour, in my head. Moths. Seekers, like us all, of light, even if content with a small wattage of wonder, yet wondrous they are. Their markings a pattern book of camouflage, mandalas in the ashes of conflagration, fragile wisps of defenseless, evanescent life. Shades of slate and loess and hay and soot, their delicate dusty markings like wind marks on the surfaces of stars. However pretty you want to paint it, there's a lot of them in our apartment. Virginia Woolf wrote a long paean to them, well, an essay of 5 paragraphs. You've probably been force-fed it somewhere, school, college, made to chew over its saga of the moth's tenacious will to live and overpowered fortitude until it wore you down. When I was younger, its seeming triteness bored me. Death as a subject held little traction. But I'm older now, and the possible perfection of the piece bothers me, which is much more interesting. Moths. They're pathetic and slow when flushed from the cupboards where they've borne numerous offspring in the whole grains I might have made supper with one day. They teeter in the air, progress erratically like ellipses of the inconsequential. Dot, dot, there's another one, and then a gun. How do they do that? Until you see they're folded into a nook behind some item. They're living blemishes with wood-grain finish. When they flitter across the window panes of my girlfriend's kitchen, I am admonished to become an avenging thumb of Damocles, a genocidal scourge, brandishing weaponry, tea towel, pot holder, spatula. My retributive hand snatches and swats them out of the air or to a smear of schmutz in a corner I then have to wipe. A cumbering business. I don't kill them with an easy conscience, or not always. They are delicate and helpless and too easy to smudge out of existence where it seems they only had a minor role anyway. What are they? A snack for bats and birds? Wafters of the dust accumulated on light bulbs? Well, maybe that's useful. And they're pollinators, so there's that. They're not nearly as vilifiable as whiny mosquitoes or annoying bluebottles, or that fruit fly so small it's hard to consider that it has a death wish, though as it floats in our peripheral vision, it demonstrates one. One's sympathies, of course, are on the side of life. The moth is butterfly-esque, and what ogre in the shape of, well, me, my hands are raised, wants to snuff out something we associate with the evanescence of beauty that makes us light-hearted and flutters our hearts with glee? The moth is but the shadow of the colorful creatures Nabokov liked to introduce into his killing jar. Lepidoptera and literati make for an uneasy mix. The moth is merely the lesser patterned inseam. We can grow annoyed with that pesky fly. We never have a problem hating the mosquito that seeks to gnaw at any hope of rest as we feign sleepy nonchalance and it circumnavigates the bedroom's Galaxian dark. But the moth, some unassayable amount of meaningless tissue, nobody's collector's item, a fraction of infinitesimal nothingness that just happens to have a pulse and unfortunate digestive tendencies. No, I can't despise it, for it has made me stare into the lunacy of my own darknesses. Without wishing to conjure a therapist's couch full of unmet need, the fact is, until the last 2 decades, I never really had a good sweater. I remember as an early teen coming across a couple of V-neck sweaters in a store selling what passed for fashion back in my parochial, hopeless hometown neighborhood. It was the scrag end of a sale, a bog-simple, commoner garden V-neck. Like my father, I don't like being constrained at the throat and rarely wear a tie or crew neck. My larynx has to be able to gulp in dismay at the universe, pressing in at the little closet of existence I less than wholeheartedly inhabit. I'm inhibited about my neck, too. These feckless sweaters were plain. Color or pattern didn't matter back then, just fitting in, a fade into the woodwork anonymity. Even so, I was a naive purist. Though they were factory knits, I revered Shetland wool as the acum of non-synthetic virtue. I'd seen pictures of the happy-looking sheep they came from. Why wouldn't they be happy? They were rounded in better wool than the cheap shoddy that seemed to gird my childhood. That they were on sale, the sweaters. The sheep were munching away at their gale-blasted, storm-smacked northern isle in the outer Hebrides, made them affordable, a 2-for-1 price doubly alluring to the pennywise on pocket money. To my youthful eyes, they appeared like a gift from the gods, some presentiment from myth, like an armored breastplate for a hero ringed in light. They materialized out of the mundane like, well, an insect suddenly ascribed significance, nay, gravitas, by a female essayista of the highest literary taxonomic order. What I could do, I did. I bought one in tone of brown that might represent boredom itself, the other in an unfortunate wan that the salesman dignified as tapioca. One, does it matter which, was actually a size too small. Whichever, I squeezed myself into it anyway. I was shy and dull. My hope was that I would emerge from my callow chrysalis transformed, like something from Kafka with better social antenna. I would be bold and fly. In my tepid fashion, I was a torpid 20-watt teenage boy attempting to flash some razzmatazz back at the sun. It wasn't sunny very often in hometown, but you get the hazy, motish drift. If nothing else, they fit me to a T, in that most of my life I've crimped myself into corners where my colors didn't show. Difference, no matter how subtle, just didn't fly that well where I was from, even if I dared to assert it. Disappointment wore through fast. The sweaters were cheaply made. They were knit without care. They itched. They were ordinary. Never had I been so disappointed by sheep. Yet, in my heart, the Isles of Shetland float to this day like a Shangri-La swathed in romantic mists and the inevitably baleful shipping broadcasts on the radio from the BBC. Perhaps I should have hearkened more to those warnings. Imagine calendar pages in an old movie, months fluttering off like moths on drugs, perhaps the sugar from my cereal, perhaps from working their way into the packets of vitamins that used to reside in the kitchen. By some point in midlife, I had come to accumulate, by luck and happenstance, 3 fine sweaters. They were well blocked, knit with a sense of capaciousness and shape of fine quality wools, crew necks that left me confident rather than choking on my own self-consciousness. One, styled like a sweatshirt, effused so much class it couldn't be a sweatshirt, yet it carried the insouciance of one anyway. And one was a big stitch hand-knit of my mother's, remarkable for it actually fitting, the best she'd ever made for me, the last before she died. I didn't wear them often. For most of the year, I stacked them in my cedar closet. I had a fine old apartment then, as if it were a safe deposit box or a reliquary. Each fold interlarded with bars of soap, spliced with cedar blocks, more soap than sweater, enough cedar to purify a sweat lodge. For all the many years in that apartment, if ever a moth haplessly whiffled through any room, my cats would leap and swivel out of their boredom to take it down in midair. I adored my sweaters. They were a small, good thing I intended to make last. Then I found a girlfriend with contested closets. In them, squadrons of wispy fauna with antennae and eating disorders. With a proboscis, who wouldn't have an eating disorder? But why am I defending them? Her kitchen cupboards were urban battle zones, boxes, gritty and overwhelmed like sniper-pocked buildings. Her clothes closets were ground zeros of odiferous fallout, mothballed no-go zones where anyone searching for a clothing item might have to give up, pushed back by the olfactory tear gas. But even through the smoke of battle, moths flew like lone jets on suicide missions, outnumbered by superior forces, but clearly not ceding their right to autonomy. Moth to flame, I moved in. Belatedly, I've done some research. The facts flitter. I've learned there's 160,000 species of moth worldwide, compared to only 17,500 butterflies. Round numbers the IRS would suspect, and that suggest guessing, not counting. The facts fascinate. I've learned that they navigate by the moon and stars, and if there's cloud, geomagnetic clues. Me, I writhe in self-consciousness in having to ask for directions, or use MapQuest and grumble there's a better way. They hear sounds through their wings. Me, I always think there's more wax to be excavated from my ears if I only had the right digging tool. Pheromone traps are often used as a method of eliciting whether moths are present. Me, I just poke a finger through the holes the girlfriend's discovered in her shawl and waggle it at her. I've discovered recently that the excreta from the clothing moth can sometimes be colored due to the dyes in the fabric they have ingested. The world of fact is a moth-eaten tapestry. The fight for the disputed territories went on. Whole mornings, grumpy mornings, mornings that feel like going to IKEA or Home Depot, have been lost to standing on a chair, wiping down or throwing out anything solid in the kitchen cupboards, bags of nuts and dried fruits, packets of anything grainy, rice, pasta, found shrouded in a white, cobwebby dust. Adding more megatonnage, hanging more noxious, fissionable material to the clothes closets, it's worse. Open the door and inhale, and it's bad. How dangerous are these mothball, crystal flake, paradichlorobenzine products? Well, be careful, go the cautions. Not to let them have contact with plastic buttons or hangers or garment bags, lest they cause the plastic to soften and melt into the fabric. the time you find any clothing item you might want, face puckering into a gurning rictus, you can no longer care to wear it. The scent of, shall we call it, given the cancer-causing agents involved, death, pervades every fiber, not yet nibbled. One deep summer night many years ago, a friend drew my attention to the front screen door of my country place. I'd left the 20-watt porch light on. There on the screen, like wisps of cindered tissue paper, like pencil shavings blown off a desk, like worn coins or cancelled stamps pressed flat in a collection, perhaps enough to send Nabokov into orgasm and doubt that he'd long chased the wrong creature, were more moths than I'd ever imagined. A swarm of butterflies is called a kaleidoscope, which couldn't be more fitting, all that color and variegation. But these moths were just as beautiful in their umbra, their mariahs, their nightshades, as is the term for them, an eclipse. An eclipse is a rare and moving thing, an eclipse of moths, perhaps rarer. Beautiful in their motley, otherworldly in their presence, they thickened on the screen until it was a living membrane, a breathing organ of the night. Thus displayed, my friend and I could not help watching them, pulled by the enormous strangeness, the simple wonder of something so alive. I've seen a bright double rainbow from the porch of that house, and a partial eclipse, shooting stars, meteor showers, orbiting space junk, and blinking planes like sleepy fireflies. But nothing transfixed quite like that screen of moths. That moment trembled like their wings. It's a house I know I'll lose before my death. Its upkeep, its inaccessibility, its age, my own. Knowing that often saddens me, but I cling to it still as they did to the screen, drawn by their own marveling. One has to try to cling to something. Virginia's days were often muffled by what she described as cotton wool, those so many moments of existence that are less than keen, less felt. But that country night, my senses were instinct sharp, awed to stillness, and my wary expectation of the future's losses slid, however temporary, into reclusion. Now I'm put in mind of Virginia's own words, that life, which is so fantastic, cannot be altogether tragic. I wasn't aware of them that night of the moths, decades ago now, and surely neither did she recollect them the year before her essay on her moth ever appeared, when, with her heart and pockets weighed down with stones, she waded deep into an eddying river, when that thought might have reminded and reassured her that life held recurrent moments of saving, amazing grace. They were just moths, but in their dark, tremulous covering, they bared the soul to itself. They were just moths, but who couldn't love a moth? For a while, I'd kept my sweaters in the basement storage unit. It's cold down there, inhospitably safe, Mars with bicycle locks. The things people try to forget are stashed there, the bodies, or the bits of the past they can't part with. But up top came winter engagements. I needed my roomy sweaters of distinction that flattered to deceive, that fits smugly into a wider world I mostly couldn't bring myself to keep up with. Inevitably, though I'd clearly chosen not to think it so, my sweaters joined the body count. Sure, they were only sweaters, but when I discovered what had happened, I felt a little of the frail fabric of the self had frayed in tiny mandible folds of the cuffs, had taken what looked like bullet holes to the chest. It wasn't sweaters that were lost, but something dependable that should last, like the sun. It was a seemingly needless loss, and it darkened my mood. One can buy more, of course, but that wasn't the point. Those sweaters would have got me to eternity, where it's probably breezy. In a casket, I would have looked really good in any of them. There's something comforting in that some small thing in life is suffice, that what you hold will see you out. To lose them was to feel slippage. This wasn't about them so much as my moving toward the inevitable. How instinctual it is to live on the wing, on the prayer, assuming the bad thing will miss us. There was no replacement. Even though I fully expect Mum to be knitting beyond the grave, there's simply no way she could deliver another sweater to me that I would dare put on. I've come to realize, winging my way through a life I'd ever felt peripheral in, low on the phylum scale and in the occluded eyes of the wider world, negligible. My sweaters fed me the illusion I was finessing my way through that life, a life in camo with minimal damage. I've tried to kill that self-revelation, but I can't. To the girlfriend, we were addressing the problem in that we were doing something. For me, the issue was a lot deeper than a kitchen cabinet or a walk-in closet. For some things, nothing can be done. What I could do, I did. I learned there are some tried and tested ways to deter clothes moths. You can heat clothing in the oven 30 minutes at 120 degrees. Or if you have room in your freezer, slip the items in a bag and keep them below 18 degrees for several days. But these only rid larvae already present. For further deterrence, there's also the option of spraying clothes with insecticide. What's a bit of toxic residue when you can have the personal space demanded by a petroleum derivative? Does anyone do this? If you do, beware. The chances are you'll exchange stains for holes, and you'll have to be careful near open flames, sparks, electrical circuits. Which surely answers my question. If this is the advice readily available, any number of people obviously have tried it, which is perhaps more frightening than the problem itself. Not that I am free of making matters worse on my own. Better maybe to use pheromone traps, yet it turns out clothes moths and food moths are turned on by a different musk. What I needed was the advice for when you know you're wrong to feel it, but you think you want vengeance. Moths pop up like video game incitements to violence, shooting range targets, less than ducks in a line, lesser than clay pigeons. Orwell shot an elephant with all that mighty metaphoric tonnage, and I hunt the moth. In funks, I stabbed at those in our kitchen cabinets with a pencil in their hiding places, tried to bludgeon them with the eraser, mayhap like some half-demented or idling literary great in the past, stumped for meaning or her next line. Come on. Virginia wrote a long essay about scouring London in search of a pencil. You don't think? Meaning to help. She likely used it, maybe nudged her moth, a directive poke, a divining prod. Why was it dying? Ennui? Alienation? Can flying one's tiny antenna into a pane of solid glass be said to be self-defenestration? A suicide attempt? Why, really, Virginia's drawing a bead, her crosshair's interest? Admittedly, moths taunt and distract, though they're surely not meaning to. They probably want to shrink by like anything else with minimal defenses. I swat and swipe at mine with inconsistent degrees of fervor, and some inevitably fade into niches behind groceries I'm determined not to clean amongst one more time. Once the forced berserker bloodlust ebbs, and it doesn't take long, I don't mind their escape. It's like several flies at once massing in my workroom or the kitchen in summers. Sometimes, driven to peevishness, and it doesn't take much, I snatch up one of our several long-handled swatters shaped like some generic flying insect, griddles and cross-hatchings of plastic retribution on a stick. In such instances, I feel justified. I've opened doors and windows. I've tried to be a good Jane about it all and whisk them out unharmed. Yet the foolish flies don't heed the hint that they are slowing the production of literature for which no one cares, and even that is more than for their own lives. They buzz in my darks. They walk in my consciousness. As any angered god, I save face with zappings of lightning bolt, or my approximation thereof. Pissed, swatting, swish, whoosh, thunk. As it becomes a test of my reflexes, I even come to enjoy killing a little. Yet the line of leers I'll always revere buzzes in my head. Flies, wanton boys, the gods. And I am shamed their death has been my dissipation. I'm further shamed I've donned a god's mantle, conveniently forgetting I'm the plaything of larger forces, and always have been. Really, what's any mild inconvenience a minute's patience wouldn't assuage? What hurt is the drone of a summer bluebottle? Well, in a small enclosed space, it reverberates in the head, and in a kitchen, well, they land, and when they move all those scrofulous legs, it makes me wonder what they've prior landed on. In the Middle Ages, apparently, it was believed insanity was caused by flies invading the brain. Given the swirling of flies there must have been, with a third of Europe rotting of black death in handcarts, this surprises me not. Social memory, collected unconsciously, probably explains my tetchiness when they gather in the shambles of my kitchen or my workroom. The collective noun is a business of flies. I imagine flies on offal. No wonder I've never savored business as a word. Moths in closets, bats in belfries, flies in business. It's all insecticidal madness. Nabokov, Kafka, Virginia's moth, my own. So it seems there's roughly 200,000 species of moth catalogued in our universe, or maybe 5 times that number. All the bugged-out entomologist people, they don't know. So maybe I shouldn't feel foolish. I confused 2 kinds. The moths in the kitchen cabinets, I've now learned, are a different pest. And there's only 2 types of tawny beige moth that fly by day, and I conflated them. Only one, the clothes moth, devours wool. Their larvae, anyway. The larvae hatch and feed on the keratin and anything else that might be found in the fibers. The sweat in sweater is what draws them to our closets and what we've dribbled and splashed. We inadvertently bring about our own exasperation while we brightly skitter toward the darkly inevitable. The girlfriend, for example, has many rugs, some made in contrastive patterns from old re-dyed remnants. These retreads often bought online expensively from dubious merchants. I've discovered the undersides of carpets can be bassinets to moth larvae, security blankets to snuggle in. Girlfriend was also apt to not finish all her cashews, walnuts, flavored almonds, and leave them around in the kitchen cupboards for eons of moth time. She'd go on baking jags that would leave her with pounds of flour not quite used up, not quite sealed. On the other hand, the girlfriend is an avid washer of her wools, but I must confess I've rarely been inclined to do so. The prevailing wisdom of my mother's when I was growing up was that one rarely washed jumpers and cardigans. I think to wash anything too much was deemed bad for it. Dry cleaning was too fancy for us, and washing woolies meant soaking time in sinks too busy to be spared. A childhood, if not of want, at least wanting for some better, less woollier wisdoms. But if contagions are coming, and it always is, good intentions and habits tend to, at some point, to be circumvented. Contagion is nothing if not opportunistic. Tiniola psiella, the clothing moth, doesn't have a proboscis either. It's got mandibles. The adults themselves can't eat and have to survive on what they imbibed in infancy. Can an insect be said to have an infancy? Or are they all just a mouthful of undeterred need? Aren't we all? But then, I've worn my checkered grey wool scarf around my neck since I bought it on the eve of the millennium. I've never washed it or done anything to protect it, just left it hanging in the same closet in which my sweaters were laminated between whole packs of soaps. If any item of my clothing were ingrained with sweat, it's that. But this year, my never-worn, cabled wool gloves, same closet, were Swiss cheesed at the knuckles. That this should surprise me is disappointing in itself. Surely I've learned by now, behind entropy lies amazement. My unfortunate berserker moments aside, I don't like things to die. I can't endure movies in which creatures are hurt. Most things done to people I can watch, but the old family dog has to be shot. I'll look away. The Yearling to me is a horror movie. Bambi, same thing. If there's a foreign country I would invade purely for its evil ideology, it would be Disney World. Yet, I still tear up at the most asinine, sentimental, animated claptrap they candidly floss up. As antidote, I suck up apocalyptic movies like Halloween Candy. For the human race, it's a different story. Wipe them out tomorrow, say with a little asteroid direct hit, core meltdown, wind-borne, antibiotic-resistant, anthrax pandemic zombie apocalypse, with a side of irradiated Black Death, Chernobyl, Love Canal, wild mushrooms, and I wouldn't grieve at all. I just worry about my cats faring in a feral world without me after I dropped. Those sweaters of mine were breastplates. They would, I expected, carry me through the days until some bureaucratic power discovered my failing independence in some geriatric year and whisked me, resisting, out of whatever aged squalor I had spun for myself into some sterile hospice house of bingo. But not to worry. I'd swallow mothballs as EMT wheeled me out. It's the inconsequential sweating into consequence that kills us. Viruses we can't even imagine, meanings we can't inoculate against, ways of being unanticipated. England, so damp, so fusty, so stale. Maybe the mild yet keen day Virginia stared her moth to death was indication she wasn't sunny herself. Bombings of cities reported from World War II Europe, already devastating her hope for humanity. Holes discovered in her woolies drawer, perhaps finishing off her mood for the day. I just wonder. It eats at me a little bit. She was dead early the next year. The small stuff. We sweat it. Does our heads in before the cowled reaper ever gets here. In all our closets, our drawers, our trunks, our attics, caches of self. Our many skins drowned in camphor and naphthalene, ravaged and unraveled by whoever and whatever we've come to be.
Peter, that was just magnificent.
Well,
really,
extraordinary.
You know, you read it on the page, and yet there's a quality that the words get from the human voice, and, you know, particularly the author of those words, that is just adding so much nuance and meaning. And thanks so much for just a very eloquent reading. I want to make Sharon, do we have a minute or two before the... I want to interject a very quick comment, and then I'll turn it over to Sharon.
Just for a minute.
For the station identification. But, Peter, just reflecting that line about people in the Middle Ages thinking that insanity came from flies invading the brain. Just a couple hours ago, I happened to read on my phone a news story from Texas about the discovery of brain-eating amoeba living in lakes. Yeah, and you know, it struck me in two ways. One, that there may be some connection between flies and amoeba that the Middle Ages actually intuited. And two, that, of course, we like to look back and, of course, feel far superior to those previous times, but I don't think we know what to do about brain-eating amoeba any more than they did about flies. And, in fact, who knows what we don't know. We've learned, of course, from the pandemic remains so much larger than what we do. So I thought that was really, really an apt moment in your essay, among many.
Yes, very timely. You're listening to Fifth Tuesday, a special edition of The Writer's Voice and Planet Poet, Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio, live and local in the Catskills. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, And joining me, as you heard, is my guest co-host, poet and novelist Lee Slonimsky, and our special guest essayist, Peter Bricklebank. Thank you, guys. Peter, that was so prescient and very funny also, I have to admit.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Very funny.
So let me ask, a number of questions occurred to me, both the first time I read it and then also listening to it now. My first question is, how did you get the idea for an essay, which is really such a fabulous mix of, natural observation and philosophical ruminations stemming from them? It seems very well researched, and yet, it's almost has to be written by a philosopher as well as a naturalist. So I am very curious where the idea came from.
Well, Lee, I've been called some things in my time, but no one's ever called me a philosopher. The idea. Well, they didn't read the essay. the idea, such as it was simply came from the frustration of the moths. I found that I was having to kill them and not wanting to kill them. There's no story to that. The narrative is they were there, we killed them, they're gone, which is certainly not an essay. But I'd been also thinking about essayists in the past. If you think of Montaigne, who had written about Plutarch and Seneca, and if you think of then the English essayist Hazlitt, who had written about Montaigne, and then you think about Virginia Woolf and Robert Louis Stevenson, who had written about Hazlitt, or the Japanese Buddhist monk Kenko, I think, not Kenko, who had written about Sai Shonagon, the courtesan. So there's this tradition in the classical personal essay of essayists paying obeisance or in some way entering into a conversation with essayists from the past. And I was interested in doing that, and I had no idea how you did it. But obviously the moths made me think of an essay that I taught with sometimes in Virginia Woolf's piece that I'd had mixed feelings about. It's funny, working on the essay, I've come to revere it more and more. So I had that in my head, that I wanted to do something like that. And I wasn't sure where it was going. But then I did research, and you mentioned research. Essays often use research, but what I see a lot of these days is research that feels somewhat regurgitated, but not transformed in any way. And I wasn't keen on that. It didn't seem right to me. And I thought, well, I want to push myself to do a little more research. So my idea of research was to go online and just find a little bit more information about clothes moths and moths in general and how to fight against them. I didn't go very far, as my research online tends to go to the first page. But I found some interesting things, one of them being that the group name for a butterfly is a kaleidoscope. Now online, of course, you get all sorts of things, but as soon as I saw that one, I thought, that's right, and I'm going with that one. And then I found that the moth was the eclipse. So that gave me something to play with. As soon as I found the title, An Eclipse of One's Own, and I realized it was about death and one's own death, and then of course Virginia's death, which is prefigured in her essay. And if I'm doing a obeisance to that essay, if I am entering into some sort of conversation with it, which I tried to do in this piece by using some of the phrases, what I could do, I did, that kind of thing, in my piece, then I knew I had something. and then it was a question of finding out what that is, and working.
Do you, in your research, did you come across the explanation for specifically the term eclipse in relation to? I mean, they're very like several of the group names mentioned in the essay. They're very startling and evocative. But is there any logic to? I mean, it came to my mind that if you had enough moths to actually create an eclipse of the sun or the moon, you really would have, something more like a horde of locusts. But I'm curious if you came across the explanation for the term.
I don't recall it. I mean, the kaleidoscope for butterflies made complete sense to me. And then eclipse, having seen the actual screen of moths here, that made some sense too. So I didn't really go any further. I was just so delighted that the words were so interesting in themselves.
So picking up on the clarity you've given now as to, just in a general way, a combination of your familiarity with the literary form of the essay, both as a writer and a teacher, and then personal experiences, especially, I'd say that Virginia Woolf essay is one of the most anthologized, at least in American higher education, and certainly you mentioned Orwell, Shooting an Elephant would probably be a competitor for the most anthologized, but basically in terms of that combination, and Virginia Woolf is treated with great, I think, depth in the essay, and really interesting the way you conclude with, her putting her into her own life. But is there something? I mean, did you, in a sense, feel like you were carrying on a tradition of, for lack of a better word, sort of, composition reader standards or classics, which, are often endlessly repeated from one textbook to the other? I was very struck in reading this how you had found so much original to say about a topic that, is kind of, known to be treated in that one essay. Do you feel that there's sort of and you mentioned, of course, Montaigne and other, prominent essayists. Do you feel, in a sense, the essay carries on a tradition that, although it's probably not at all having the impact on society it once did in terms of, book world, but certainly these essays reach massive numbers of people in their anthologized, presence. So, and in fact, to the extent this is a unorthodox audience to this show, it's nice to bring the essay to the attention of an oral audience. But do you see yourself? I mean, do you see the essay as being in a tradition like that, or did you just see it maybe completely independent of those earlier works?
Well, as I say, I was trying to sort of continue that tradition of speaking to essayists of the past, and to the essay. There are many topics that have been done over the years, walking, friendship, and so on. Death is an obvious one, and so yeah, I wanted to try to do something in that vein, to somehow strike up a conversation with an essayist in the past. If you can't invite them to your dinner party, then perhaps at least you can talk to them through your creative work.
Well, you succeeded very well, and it worked beautifully on the radio.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very successful, because when you're just listening, you can just, even more so than reading it, or you hear it out loud, and you read it beautifully, you can sort of sink into it in an interesting way.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it might read that way is that it was often in the process of writing it, I was speaking it out loud, talking about speaking to Virginia Woolf. I was also speaking to myself in my room with flies buzzing, and very much concerned with the rhythms and the sound and the sense.
Yes.
I also was curious, and I guess this is, of course, based on in part on knowing you personally, but given the sort of similarities or the connections, and yet also the contrast in your own, personal background with Virginia Woolf, both being British by birth, but you having a kind of working class background, and her famously being, what, for lack of a better term, we could call part of the elite. And yet, it's the common thread of the relating to the moths that seems to cross all those barriers. But again, I'm wondering if, to the extent that she's an influence or a template, did those kinds of social factors influence how you approach the subject at all? Or, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually say so. I wasn't really thinking about that. Although when you bring it up, the idea that her sweaters would not have been in a nice cedar closet and quite safe would surprise me. But it's England, and moths get in various places, and it just occurred to me that it could have been that she experienced losing a favorite sweater too, and in her already blue funk, would that have depressed her just that bit more? An interesting thing, one of the really lovely things about reading for you today is that I went back and reread her essay a few days ago, and was startled to have a thought that I'm embarrassed to not have thought about before. But she is watching the moth, and she watches it through a period of the day until it dies. Now, here I am in the Catskills. We have a front porch with glass and wire, and wire screen. And when I get a bee or a moth or something, I will get a plastic container and try to catch it and put the top on and let it go. The flies, I try to let go, and then they annoy me. But I try to free the creature. And Virginia herself, and one of the lines of hers that I use is that one is always on the side of life. So what struck me a few days ago was that unless I'm mistaken, she's writing in a pleasant house, and the likelihood is that window opens. Why doesn't she open the window and let the creature out? Now, she's writing. She doesn't have to go and get a plastic container like I do. She can just lift it, and presumably the moth is right beside her. Why doesn't she lift the sill and let it go if she's on the side of life? There's something about her mood there that is watching it hammer itself against the window for a few hours and exhaust itself till it dies.
It's almost like watching herself and her future self.
Yes, right.
Yeah, I think many years ago when I first read it, and I share with you the experience of having taught it, that I, and it's a very simple analysis, but I did get on that point a sense of profound depression from the essay. That explained her inability to take any action. I mean, it was sort of a brilliant intellect at work with what she was observing, but there was a kind of almost paralyzed distance from taking any kind of affirmative action on either mood or bigger issues than that.
Right.
And
So she talks about the power of the day and growing sort of out there in the world that she's observing, the cutting of the hay or whatever it is they're doing. And it just seems, well, if you're feeling that, why wouldn't you let it go? She's very, very sort of caught up in her own funk. And she is, at that time, worrying about World War II and some of the things coming through there. But I just wondered if there wasn't something else to just tip her a little bit. Because and then when I compared that with my own frustration at losing these particular sweaters. When I thought I'd kind of aced it, and I thought that they're always going to be safe, and then they were taken. There was just that slight, brief bleakness, that eclipse, if you will, of mood. So another connection.
Mm-hmm.
Especially as you describe the moth holes as bullet holes to the chest.
Yes,
that
right.
was a nice segue.
Yeah.
Sharon, do you have any sort of closing? I know we're getting close to the end.
Yeah, we have a couple of more minutes. This has been wonderful. Please continue for a couple of more minutes. I have a couple of announcements, and then we're done.
Right. So I was also struck, and I'm saying this given also the regional nature of the audience, that the although you don't identify the location of the very vivid front screen door scene, that it's, well, certainly evokes a rural place, and in fact, the rural place is not far from WIOX listening area. It may well be in it, sort of the northern end of Greene and southern end of Albany counties. And I wanted to ask you if there is probably no direct reference, but if you did have a sense in writing this of being, in some degree, a Catskill writer, or having employed a Catskill background, that helps to, in a small but very significant way, given the power of that moment in the essay, that helps to make the essay what it is.
Right. Well, I've been coming up to the Catskills since about 1988. So I guess I could say that I am something of a Catskill writer, though I'm not always here. I guess the simple thing, like the image of the planes that are landing, they're blinking and circling for Albany. As when I describe them as sleepy fireflies, it's something that I'd thought of before, because we get inundated, obviously, with fireflies around here, and that image, for the piece, just came. I just plucked it out of the air. It was already there. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yes, the Catskills infuses me to a degree. There's another essay that I'm pondering that connects with a Ted Hughes poem called "The Thought Fox," which I studied as a teenager, and we had foxes in our yard this year for the first time in just about all those years I've been here. And there's something there that I want to speak to. So I think the Catskills are just so verdant and wonderful that they always have their say in some way, just like the moths did, out of nowhere.
Peter and Lee, thank you so much for being on the show. Your gorgeous essay, and I wish you best of luck with it.
Thank you.